Welcome, you guys. This is another episode where I recorded this way in advance in anticipation for this season on leadership with Gary Takacs, and he aired his episode he interviewed me on his show, and now I'm finally airing the episode that we did together. He shares some phenomenal examples of leadership from his years of consulting, of the practice where he's involved in directly. I think you guys are going to really enjoy this with the podfather, Gary Takacs himself. Swell CX is a review service that George and I send people to all the time. What it does is it asks your patients for a review at a time that's convenient for them and is easy for them to do. So it shoots them a text or an email, you can choose both, at a certain time in the evening when they're most likely to respond. It has a single click through, so as soon as they click that link, if they're logged in on their device, boom, they're already leaving you a review. Now, we've consistently seen something, which is people switch over and all of a sudden there's a spike in their reviews. We're not entirely sure how they do this so much better. It seems like a simple process, but they've refined the details in the invitation, in the execution, and it works.
Yeah, this is just one of those services that it's hands down the best. And I love it because it's not the most expensive. It's very reasonably priced and they're just so good. If you're not using them, then you should be. It's just that easy.
Go to swellcx.com/shared practices to get the absolute lowest price on Swell through our exclusive promo. Again, that's swellcx.com/shared practices to start getting more reviews with Swell today. Okay, I have with me today the podfather, Gary Takacs from the Thriving Dentist Show, who listeners will know had a large impact on my desire to start a dental podcast, because right as I was starting dental school is right when the Thriving Dentist Show appeared on the scene. And by the time I was done dental school, Gary was teaching us. He was there at Midwestern Arizona and shaping our views, our philosophies. And so all along the way, Gary has inspired me and has taught me and has been a source of wisdom. And I'm really excited to do that again today. So Gary, welcome to the show.
Hey, Richard, it's great to hear your voice. And we go way back. It's so fun for me to be tracking your trajectory in our amazing profession. And this is a treat. So thanks for having me on the show.
Well, well, thank you. I remember going to your new practice when you guys had just moved over and finished the construction. One of the really distinct things that I remember from your practice is the stained concrete. You were very proud of that, and I was like, man, that is a great surface treatment. I wish that would be phenomenal for just kind of the look, the cleansability. Has it held up? That's my question.
Oh, yeah. Can I share the story and about this flooring material for our operatories? Well, so when we bought our practice, when Paul Nielsen, 2005 grad of the University of Washington, he and I partnered together to purchase a practice in May of 2007. And when we bought our practice, it was in a dilapidated backwards facility. However, we were saddled with a lease that we had to kind of ride out. But our goal was to ride out to the end of the lease and then hopefully get to the point where we could buy our own building. And we were able to do that. And so in April of 2011, we moved into a new space. It's in a 2-story professional building. We're on the second floor, and we own the condo space that we practice in. It's about 2,600 square feet, 6 operatories. And Paul and I designed that office in partnership with the dental construction firm. And as we were designing that office, one of the big debating topics was what to use for flooring material in the operatory, because everything you use is a compromise. Carpet just doesn't wear very well. Carpet in the operatory is a bad move, but it does have some redeeming qualities. It does mitigate some sound, but it looks bad very quickly. And we looked at other flooring options. We were looking at hardwood floors. We looked at synthetic floors like Pergo and other type of product, bamboo, bamboo, not only natural bamboo, but also synthetic bamboo as a flooring material. And then our builder said, "Hey, Gary, I want you to take a look at this new flooring material. We don't have a lot of experience with it, but we've been using it in selected offices, and our clients that have used it love it." And he described it. He said, it's actually about a half inch of concrete that is troweled in, and it has about a 5% rubber component that's mixed in with it. And the rubber component is made from recycled tires. And so it's concrete with about a 5% rubberized component. It's troweled in to have a slightly irregular finish, and it's color impregnated. And all those points I'll come back to. But he said, "Hey, here's an office we did up in Carefree. Go take a look at it and tell us what you think." And when we got up there, we said, "Okay, we found our flooring material." Yeah. And the cool thing about it is that rubberized component of the concrete does two functions. Number one, it provides a slight cushioning to reduce fatigue on your knees and hips and other places dentists might feel fatigue from standing. In the times that they're standing in the operatory, right? Sure. And the second thing that it does is because it has that rubber component to it, it doesn't echo sound. Instead, it absorbs sound. If you have a hard surface flooring material in the operatory, the sound from everything from the handpiece to any other instrumentation that's being used is often magnified, and it can lead to hearing issues and other just a loud, kind of a loud sounding environment. Have you ever been in a restaurant, Richard, where the sound is such that you literally can't carry on a normal conversation with your dining partner because it's so loud? Yep. It's the same type of thing, but it's dental sounds that contribute to that. So the fact that it's rubberized allows it to absorb sound instead of reflect it. Awesome feature we didn't know. And then the third thing is because it's color impregnated, if you happen to gouge it or scruff it somehow, you literally can't tell because it has an irregular finish to it, a troweled finish to it. You literally can't tell. So to answer your question very directly, today we're in 2019. It's now 8 years after the installation of that flooring. It literally looks like the day it was put in.
That's awesome.
And I couldn't be happier about a finish choice. We've had some other finishes that I'd say, hey, if I had to do over again, I'd do this differently. But when it comes to that flooring material in the operatory, couldn't have picked a better material. Plus the fact that by the nature of the material, if you ever have water issues in the operatory, which are inevitable at some point, right. In the dental environment, it's a non-issue. There's no delamination. There's nothing that can happen. You basically just mop it up. And the finish on it, by the way, is done by our janitorial crew. And they simply do a wet mop of a satin finish. And they literally just wet mop it about every 3 weeks. Let it dry. It dries in 5 minutes and we're good. And that's the upkeep and finish on it.
I really value the perspective of professionals such as you and practice owners such as you who've done two things. One, been in literally thousands of dental offices, which just blows my mind, that you have helped so many dentists and been able to see the ins and outs of how different teams function, as well as I really respect the people who have been able to take a practice and grow it and then grow it again and then grow it again and then grow it again. Tell me, you told me at midwinter, just barely, and it blew me away. You guys you said you were north of 3 million now in these 6 operatories?
Yeah, if I can share the kind of the evolution of the practice, Paul and I bought a practice that was a $500,000 practice in May of 2007. And by the way, it had been absolutely static for the last 10 years. Yeah. It was, 500 one year, 499 the next, 501 the next, 497 the next. Can we agree that's a $500,000 practice?
That is a $500,000 practice.
And it was listed, and this was in 2007. The economy was actually still pretty good. It hadn't taken the dive yet. It was listed for $375,000. We ended up buying it for $315,000. It was a fixer in every different way you want to describe it. It was bereft of technology. We had no website. We had no technology in terms of advanced technology. Had one computer at the front desk that he used to send statements out, but no software in the back, no computers in the back. Had film radiography. There'll be some listeners that are thinking I'm speaking a foreign language right now. And Richard, it had paper charts.
I'm in the Army. We've had paper charts until like a few years ago, so I know it's possible.
I know that that's not a shock to you, but that might be a shock to some of your listeners. Actual paper charts, yep. Film, had one of those smelly little rooms where they developed film.
Oh, yeah.
And so you might be asking, well, Gary, why in the world did you buy this practice? Well, it had about 1,000 active patients, all of whom needed treatment. Does that sound like an opportunity to you? It did to us. So we bought that practice, and fast forward to today. Today, a two-doctor practice, Dr. Paul Nielsen and Dr. Tim Schmidt. Tim joined our practice in January of 13. He's a 2010 graduate of OHSU, or Oregon Health Sciences University. He worked his first 2 years out of dental school in a community health clinic in Moses Lake, Washington. And he wanted to get back to Phoenix, where his family was from. And I recruited him to come join us. And today we're a two-doctor practice. We're open 5 days a week. We're open Monday through Friday. Monday through Thursday, we're open 7 a.m. to 4 p.m. Friday, we're 7 to 2. We work straight through on Friday. We have a complete team we have 15 full-time team members, including 4 hygienists. I'm a big believer in the idea of hygiene as a backbone of a thriving practice. And so we have 15 days of hygiene. Let me clarify that if that sounds a little confusing. We have 3 hygienists that work 4 days a week, and we have 1 hygienist that work 3 days a week. And if you add those up together, that makes 15 days of hygiene a week. Yep. We're a general practice, very much a general family practice that also does some high-value services. The high-value services that we do is we place and restore implants. We do adult orthodontics. We do both Invisalign as well as 6-month smiles. We also do a fair amount of cosmetic dentistry. Of course, cosmetic dentistry could be anything that looks good, but I tend to think of cosmetic dentistry as veneers. We do sedation, oral conscious sedation in our practice. And Paul and Tim also have extensive restorative skills. They take about 250 hours of CE a year. And as a result of that, they're very talented in terms of advanced restorative skills. And we do some significant rehabilitative dentistry, full mouth kind of reconstructive dentistry. Paul and Tim both have a fellowship and a mastership in the AGD. Both of them are 1 case away from being accredited by the AACD. And we have a little playful competition to see who's going to get there first between them. But they take between 200 and 250 hours of CE a year. And one other point is, by choice, Paul and Tim both work 3 days a week. Paul works Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Tim works Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. That's by choice. And I persuaded them, although it didn't take much persuasion. I persuaded them to work that schedule for 2 reasons. Ironically, Richard, all 3 of us, we all own the practice together. We're in a 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 partnership. When Paul and I owned it, it was 50-50. And when we brought Tim in, we diluted our shares to a third, a third, a third. We own it equally in 1/3 partnerships. And I persuaded them to reduce their schedule to 3 days a week clinically for 2 reasons. Ironically, all 3 of us have 4 kids. Now, my kids are adults. Their kids are much younger. But I said, man, if knowing what I know now, if I could go back to when my kids were your kids' age right now, I'd work less and I'd spend more time with my kids. Yeah. And then the second thing I said is, I'd like you to have lots of bandwidth to be able to take CE, because there's a direct correlation to the amount of postgraduate CE you take and the success you experience as a dentist. A direct correlation. Sure. And so I said, I want you guys to be able to immerse yourself in CE, which is a very easy pitch to them because they're both passionate about learning. They're truly lifelong learners. And I said, I want you to be able to take this CE to the tune of 200 plus hours a year and not take it at the expense of your family. I mean, if you're working clinically 4 days a week and then you're running the business the other day, the other work day of the week, and then you've got the weekend, if you go and take a course on the weekend, you've now taken a CE course at the expense of your family. Right. And if we can avoid that, I would try to avoid that. And so this last year in 2018, we collected north of $3 million on 6 doctor days a week. if you look at that, if you think of full-time FTE as 4 days a week, 4 doctor days a week, we're doing that on a doctor and a half. And I want to emphasize one other point. There's one other guiding principle at Life Smiles, Richard, and this is something I haven't spoken a lot about, but I'm now incorporating this into my lectures when I'm speaking. You may remember my personal background, Richard. I shared it with my students at Midwestern that my dad worked his entire career at Ford Motor Company. Yeah. He was a blue collar lunch pail carrying guy, and as a result, he never made more than $15,000 a year. And granted, that was 1970s money, sure, but it still wasn't very much money. But I count myself very blessed and very fortunate to have had the family background that I have, because it was a wonderful family. I'm the oldest of 3 boys. We had lots of love in our house. We didn't have any material things. We didn't have any money, but we sure had all the other stuff. And I wouldn't trade it for anything. And because of that upbringing, I have a soft spot in my heart and also in my business model for blue collar working class patients. And so one of the things we work really hard at Life Smiles is making dentistry affordable.
Right.
And on a academic level, that goal could be seen as direct competition with making the practice as profitable as it can be. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah. I mean,
in other words, they're competing objectives.
Why not just raise the prices and serve the higher end of dentistry and patients, and then be more profitable that way? But you're saying you have a commitment to keeping dentistry affordable for everyone.
In fact, I even use a virtual avatar that I think about when I think about that goal of making it affordable. And this comes from my wife. My wife is a retired kindergarten teacher. And when I started my firm, my consulting firm in 1989, we lived on a kindergarten teacher's salary. And so one of the avatar, and I have, we have 4 adult kids. One of our 3 daughters is a 5th grade teacher. She followed in her mother's footsteps. Okay. And the avatar that I have is, I want my practice to be perceived as from a single parent school teacher's practice as a place where he or she can go. And so we try to make dentistry affordable. And I would like to share with your listeners that it is not mutually exclusive to have a practice that is affordable on the patient side and highly profitable on the owner side. Those are not mutually exclusive.
And that's
they
amazing.
Sound like they might be.
It's amazing that you've gotten such consistent growth with that philosophy deeply embedded in what you're doing. And
it's embedded. It's embedded in our culture. And the answer to it, the short answer to it is, you just have to have enough volume. Sure. Because, as I increase my volume, my fixed expenses stay the same.
Right.
Our mortgage, we own the building, but the mortgage, it doesn't go up. It stays the same. And so if you're doing $100,000 a month and you've got a $5,000 mortgage, what's our percent of our overhead going to mortgage? 5%, right?
Right.
What if we do 200,000? What happened? What did my percent go to if my mortgage stays at $5,000 a month? If your rent's $5,000 a month and you're collecting $100,000 a month, then your rent is 5% of your revenue. I won't ask you to do the math at 300,000, but you get the point. And so they're not mutually exclusive if you have enough volume. And I'm proud of the fact that every single year of our ownership has been a new record year.
Yeah.
Every single year.
That's
and
amazing.
I keep thinking that, okay, at some point we're going to hit the glass ceiling, right?
Sure.
At some point that's not going to be possible. And in 12 years of ownership, we haven't hit it. And so far this year, through 2 months that I have, through 2019, if I take my January and February of 19 and compare to January, February of 18, we're up 12%.
That's awesome.
On a record year.
That's amazing.
So it's not mutually exclusive to be affordable, but also profitable in the practice. So I'm starting to talk a lot more about that and kind of share the tips and techniques to be able to achieve those 2 seemingly competitive goals.
Well, and this is amazing, and I think one of the keys to your success that you've talked about on your show, and I just listened to this episode today again, was your decreasing insurance dependence. And I'm gonna cut us off there. That's something that we don't have the time and the bandwidth to get into today, but I will tell people to go back to your show. You've got a mastermind coming out. You've got a lot of things around that decreasing dependence on insurance. And I have to think that that also plays a major role in all of this.
In fact, you may be aware of this, Richard, if I may, because I know we don't have time to talk about it in depth, but as a result of the interest in that topic, I created a second podcast called the Less Insurance Dependence Podcast. I started that in November. We're early on. We've got about 22 episodes out, and it's a short format podcast. It's 12 to 15 minutes. It's all about specific techniques to successfully reduce insurance dependence. So for your listeners' benefit, you can find that on iTunes or whatever podcast directory you like. Just type in Less Insurance Dependence, and there's a bunch of tactics in every show about how to successfully reduce insurance dependence in your practice.
Perfect. We will put a link in the show notes to both of your shows now so that listeners will have access to that. I have two questions for you. First, do you know what your monthly budget for supplies is? Do you know? Do you have a monthly budget? Second is, what percentage of your monthly collections is that budget? So those two questions, most offices are not tracking this, and they're definitely not taking steps to make sure they stay on budget. Zen Supplies will do both. As soon as you start using Zen Supplies, you are going to have an accurate picture of your actual supply expenditure every single month, what percentage of overhead it is. The industry average percentage is 6 to 7%, sometimes even more. What Zen Supplies has found is that their clients who use their platform and who use their philosophy and their coaching to get their office all on board can get their overhead to 5 or even 4%. Like, that is a normal, realistic goal for their clients. So if you already know your budget and your percentage of collections, say it's 6%, Zen Supplies pays for itself. It becomes a very easy decision to sign up. The second scenario is that you don't even know. You have no clue what your budget is, or maybe you knew what it was once a year ago or 2 years ago. But if you're this person, I can guarantee Zen Supplies will pay for itself. You're literally leaving thousands of dollars on the table that are either expiring from expired supplies and over-ordering things, or just going to the pockets of the supply companies because you're overpaying. When you're finally ready to start saving money on your supplies, go to zensupplies.com/SP to get $200 off your first year's subscription. Click the button to request a demo today. Zen Supplies. Let's get organized. So I want to get your perspective on something really important to me as a favor to the Podfather. This next season, we're going to do on leadership. We did a season on case acceptance, and you having trained and taught the soft skills of dentistry, the communication, the people management, the whole side of being a manager of people, a leader of people, have a lot of experience and a lot of reps seeing this and doing this in offices. And this whole next season, in my mind, I think, I've got leadership equals X, Y, and Z. I don't want to throw those out there because I don't want to, I want to hear your perspective, because what you say is going to help shape this season for our show. And I want to start off, if you can, and I'm putting you on the spot here, with an example of what this looks like when a dentist thinks that they are a good leader and they're not. Because I think we all kind of inherently think like, just like everyone thinks they're a better than average driver, everyone tends to think that, I'm a good leader. Why not? Maybe I'm not perfect at all things, but I'm better than average. Are there any stories, looking back in your years of visiting practices, of a dentist who is oblivious to their impact, their leadership, on their practice? And if you can't think of a specific, I'm sure you've got a lot of generalities, but I love specific stories, and you can scrub it for HIPAA and get the names and the details. Sure. But
I'm going to answer it a little bit differently, and I'm going to answer it from the perspective of a positive story of a positive story of leadership in action.
Okay.
And it's with Paul. And I've got to share the story because it is. I'd have trouble coming up with a better example. By the way, leadership is a passion of mine, and when we talked pre-production of hitting record on this podcast episode, I wish I would have had it on video because I was literally smiling ear to ear because leadership is such an important topic. And I'm going to make this statement, and this is a very bold, subjective statement, although it is backed by experience, personal experience of having visited over 2,200 practices as a coach. Doctors, as you're listening to this, there is very little that will impact your success more in your ownership of a practice than in you developing your leadership skills. Your leadership skills will determine the trajectory of your success more than anything else you can do in your practice. And I make that statement very boldly and intentionally, and I believe it from every fiber of my DNA. So here's the story. In 2008, we bought the practice in 2007, and in 2008, the economy tanks in Arizona. And I don't mean just like stutters, it tanks. It absolutely tanks. Yeah. It's almost the way I tell the story is that it's like you're riding on an elevator and someone gets out a big set of bolt cutters and cuts the cables and the elevator just drops out of the elevator chute.
Right.
That's what happened in the practice. One day it went from Paul was booked out 3-4 weeks solid. Now we'd always get emergency patients in if needed, but he was booked out 3-4 weeks. Hygiene was booked out, 6 weeks out, or 6 months out, but it was booked out solid, 5-6 weeks as well. It went from that one day to the economy's now tanked, and Paul's schedule is open tomorrow afternoon, and hygiene looks like Swiss cheese, the hygiene schedule. And so we have an emergency meeting, and but what do we do? And I said, Paul, I don't know. I mean, I've been through some recessions and some downturns, but I've never been through anything like this. We're going to have to rally. We're going to have to make something out of our days. We're going to have to, find opportunities to add treatment into our schedule. And in 2008, we keep detailed records of everything that happens at LifeSmile so I can share it with clients. I can share it when I'm speaking. Yeah. And we were only scheduled to goal in 2008, we were only scheduled to goal 20% of the time. When we came in, we start at 7. So at 6:45 for the morning huddle, if you look at what's scheduled that day, we were only scheduled to goal 20% of the time. Now, Richard, to step back and be objective about that, that's very poor performance. That would be a D on the report card. Sure. Would you agree?
I'd agree.
But it's not the end of the story. By the time we made it to the end of the day, we made it 80% of the time. And how did we do that? We figured out how to add in treatment during the day. And again, this isn't rocket science. It's just you have to learn how to do it. And so we would, if we had an emergency patient calling, we'd bring that patient in. We would take care of some treatment. If we had pending treatment on a treatment plan, and Paul comes in to do a hygiene check, and there was an opportunity to do that today, we would present it to the patient as we could save him a trip. We could actually do that today. Maybe a patient after hygiene is interested in adding chairside whitening, and we would tell them that, hey, at the end of your hygiene appointment, we can move you over here and we can do whitening. I mean, this isn't rocket science. That makes sense, right?
Sure.
So we have this discussion, and we have the discussion with the team, and we decide that we're now going to, as an entire team, be looking for opportunities to add treatment in. We had an entire afternoon team meeting on this. Or excuse me, it was a morning team meeting. It was the entire morning. It was 7 to noon, where we talked about all the different things we could do to add in treatment. And we decided that our lead assistant, Heidi, would be the floor general. And if anyone had the opportunity to add treatment in, they would go to Heidi, and then she would figure out yes or no if we could do that. And if it was yes, then we'd figure out what we needed to do to do it. And if it was no, then that was the case.
Sure.
And we said, let's try this afternoon. And so in the afternoon, I observed and I watched. Now, there's some things you need to know about Heidi. By the way, I love Heidi. She's one of the team members that we inherited when we bought the practice. Uh-huh. I like to say that we bought the practice because Heidi came with it. Amazing. If I could grab a lock of her hair and clone her, I'd put her at every practice on the planet.
Right.
She's that good. Now, Heidi's also German, and she's somewhat fits the stereotype of the German personality type. She's very organized. She's very structured. She's very detailed, very hardworking. First one there in the morning, last one to go in the afternoon. Many amazing qualities. So as team members would come to Heidi and look at adding treatment in, her answer would be, "Oh no, we cannot do that. Oh no, we cannot do that. We cannot do. Oh no, we cannot do that." And she was thinking ahead about, being ordered, being structured, being organized, and her answer was no. So anyway, I watched this happen time and time again that afternoon. And so I called Paul that night and I said, hey, Paul, I know you had your head down in the afternoon, but how'd we do in the afternoon? I already knew the answer to this. I said, how'd we do in the afternoon at adding treatment in? And he said, come to think of it, Gary, I don't think we added anything in. And I said, yeah, your memory is accurate, Paul. We added nothing in. And let me share with you what happened. And I shared the story. And he said, Gary, can you come to the morning huddle tomorrow at 6:45? I checked I said, yeah, I could be there. I said, what's up? He said, just come to the morning huddle. And I said, you want to tip me off or anything? And he said, no, just come. Oh, and by the way, when I look at you at the appropriate time, say yes. I said, oh okay. So I show up at 6:45, and Paul says to the team, yesterday we had this conversation about adding treatment in, and I've been thinking about it. And Heidi has so many responsibilities. She's our implant coordinator. She's our lead assistant. She's responsible for training the other assistant. She handles all supply order. Heidi has a lot on her plate. And, I don't think it's fair to put another responsibility on her plate. So I'm going to take that over myself. I'm going to be the floor general. If any of you have the opportunity to add treatment in, come to me. And by the way, if I say yes, the only question I want from any team member is, how can I help? And he turned to me and he said, Gary, what do you think? And I remembered our discussion the night before, and I said, yes, Paul, that sounds great. And that is leadership in action. Notice what he did. Let's break it down for just a minute. He didn't throw Heidi under the bus.
Okay.
He made her feel good. Hey, she has so many responsibilities. She's our implant coordinator. She's our lead assistant. She trains the other assistants. She's ordering supplies. It's not fair to put something else on her plate. So I'm going to take it over. Come to me. He's always very directive. What his request was, if you have the opportunity to add something, come to me and I will make the decision. And if I say yes, the only question I want from any team member is, how can I help? He said, any questions? And literally they shook their head no in unison, like, no, I got it. And I am not exaggerating. Here we are 12 years later. And Richard, this is zero exaggeration. I cannot recall a time when a team member came to Paul or Tim with the opportunity to add in treatment where the answer was no. It's been yes every day. So guess what the culture is in our practice?
Yes.
We can do more than we think we can.
Yeah.
Albert Einstein said that he had scientific brain measurement on this. He said our brains are so much more capable than we're actually utilizing. And he actually did scientific measurement of his brain. And I think we could agree that Albert Einstein's brain was pretty well developed.
Sure.
He said he figured he was using 6% of his potential brain capacity. Well, if Albert Einstein was using 6% of his, where are we at?
Right.
Right. So we have way more capability than we know. And leadership, is something that another kind of broad topic broad statement I want to make related to leadership is that it can be learned.
Okay.
It can be learned. I will say that it is true that some people have more natural tendency towards leadership than others, but regardless of where your natural abilities are, it can be learned. It can absolutely be a skill set that can be learned.
So, and you gave me a great positive example. Can you give me a transformation example? And once again, I'm putting you on the spot, so you feel free to redirect. But do you have an example of a time where you were coaching in a practice and you had a dentist realize, hey, I want to be better at this. I don't know where to start. I want to be a better leader. I want to take ownership of this situation. and was very humble about it and was able to improve.
Absolutely. And an immediate example comes to mind, and I'll leave names out, but I'll use the example. A new client of mine, relatively new, I'd been working with him for a handful of months, and the practice was really struggling. And it was struggling because of lack of direction, lack of leadership. And doctor would make statements about where he wanted to go in the practice, and they were vacuous statements. The team clearly would they'd nod their head because it was the polite thing to do in a meeting, but they would do nothing about implementing the initiatives that he was trying to install in the practice. And so I was still trying to get my bearings and trying to get the pulse of this practice. It had only been a few months. And I quickly realized that his goals, his direction of the practice were all seen as vacuous platitudes by the team.
Okay.
And so I had dinner with him the next time I visited his practice, and I asked permission to have a crucial conversation with him. I said, Doc, you know that my interest is only what's in your best interest. And I have a professional obligation to share with you what I see in your practice and make recommendations that will improve it, whether it's what you want to hear or not. Do I have your permission to be completely blunt and candid and direct about what I see?
Oof,
he said, absolutely.
Yeah.
Do I have your permission? Do I have your permission to be brutally honest with you?
Yeah.
And he said, absolutely. That's why I'm paying you. I wouldn't expect anything less. And I literally just said that the problem's you. It's you. Until you lead by example, they are not going to follow. And he was quiet and reflective, and he nodded his head in agreement. And I said, may I make it, because I could see that he was having trouble kind of grasping where to go with this. And I said, can I make a suggestion or a strong recommendation that I believe that will set this entire path in your practice in a different trajectory? He said, please, I please. I said, I've noticed when I'm in your practice that you arrive late every day. And he said, yeah, guilty as charged. He said, I have trouble. I got to get the kids off. I had a list of excuses. And the office this office started at 8:00 with patients. They were supposed to have a 7:45 morning huddle, and then 8:00 would start with patients. And he would routinely come into the practice somewhere between 8:10 and 8:15. I know you've never seen anything like this, Richard.
Right.
And I'm sure your listeners have never. Maybe they can just play along and imagine this happening. Pretend. Yeah. And he said, yeah, guilty as charged. And he gave me the litany of excuses. And I said, my firm recommendation is that tomorrow and every day thereafter, you show up at 7:45. Whatever it takes to get that done, you show up at 7:45. And I said, the first time you do it, the team is not going to believe it. They're going to say, oh, that was just Gary riding him, and he's doing this to make an impression. I said, you have to do it each and every day thereafter. And I said, in fact, that first day, I want you to say to the team in your own words, but here's the tone. Say, guys, I am making changes in this practice, and I'm going to start with myself. And I realized that one of the things I need to do is be an on-time dentist in this practice. And you can count on me being here at 7:45 for the morning huddle each and every day. And I said, they will look at you like, oh, I can't wait to have this backslide. And I said, when you have done this to a point where it's repeatable, it's consistent, and you're following your word, you now have reestablished your credibility as a leader. Now you can start to ask them to make changes because they're going to know how hard this is for you. This was actually a hard thing for him to do.
Right.
Even though it sounds easy, like show up at 7:45, you nimwit, I mean, it sounds easy, right?
No, but they had proof that this was hard for him.
They knew it was hard. So I said, you can't ask them to make changes if you're not going to model it. So we pick something that is going to be hard for you to do. And then they'll start to follow. And this literally set the stage for transformation in this practice. We've worked together ever since, and this practice is radically different today. In performance, profitability, enjoyment, lower stress, any way you want to measure success in a practice, It is radically different because of the doctor developing his leadership skills in this practice. And there's nothing that works like leading by example. Leading by example. It's like our kids. We can't, encourage our kids to eat healthy and us not show it to them. I mean, it doesn't make any sense, right?
So would you say that kind of a key part of leadership, number one, is leading by example and having the integrity to be the kind of person that can ask others to make changes and to perform because they're doing it themselves?
Right. Absolutely. And I'm gonna suggest maybe a little bit of a leadership construct so we can take it from the abstract to maybe something that's a little more systematic.
Perfect.
Does that sound okay?
Yes, please.
And I'm going to suggest two resources to your listeners. Both of them are favorite books of mine. And you can listen to them in both cases. These are available in audio format and Audible books. But one of them is the classic written by Stephen Covey, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. I'm sure you're familiar with that book, Richard.
I remember shopping for leather planner holders in undergraduate after reading that book and wanting, I bought my Covey inserts and planners, and I was at Goodwill shopping for a used leather-bound planner, which I found. It was great. I loved it.
It later became Franklin Covey, and Franklin was the planner, company that integrated with Stephen Covey.
Right.
But that book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, and if you follow those 7 habits, that will be a wonderful way. Each one of those habits is directly correlated to leadership in one way or another. So consider that to be a bit of a guidebook. But the other book I'm going to recommend is equally useful. And it's the book that was written by Jim Collins called Good to Great. Good to Great. Brilliant book. And in that book, Jim Collins talks about the 5 levels of leadership. And level 5 leadership is the penultimate example of leadership. And if I can summarize it in kind of an awkward way, level 1 is where you kind of understand that you have to lead, but you don't really know what to do, and you kind of fumble around with it, but you're making attempts to lead. That's level 1.
Okay.
Level 2 is where you begin to understand your role in guiding others. And by the way, even if you're a non-practice owner and you're thinking, well, this whole leadership thing, maybe I'm not interested in season 6 because, I don't own a practice yet.
Right.
In every role of a dentist, no matter where you are, you have a role in leadership. If you're an associate dentist, your role is to lead your patients to make good decisions about their oral health.
Right.
So if you're a dentist, you need to be a leader, whether you own a practice or not. So pay attention to season 6.
Absolutely.
So level 2 is where you are starting to understand your role a little bit more, and you understand the concept of, say, leading by example. Level 3 is actually where you become an effective manager, where you learn how to manage people and lead them towards desired results. And many people will never get past level 2. And by the way, you can experience a pretty good level of success as a level 3 leader in dentistry. Level 4 is characterized as a genius with 1,000 helpers. That's the way Jim Collins characterized it. This is someone who's extremely bright, extremely effective at whatever their craft is, and they've got 1,000 helpers that want to help them be successful. And by the way, most of corporate America is led by CEOs and chairmen of the board that meet the definition of level 4 leadership. And level 4 leadership will experience a very high level of success.
Right.
And level 5 leadership is a level that is up one more level even higher. It's the penultimate example of leadership, and it's characterized by someone with a deep set of someone who's highly accomplished, yet has a deep sense of humility. So someone that's highly accomplished, but also is counterbalanced by humility. And so think about those two qualities. If they're highly accomplished, people want to follow because they want to be like that leader. But if they're humble, So many cool things complement that. It shows that they're open to learning. If someone's humble, they realize they don't know everything and they have things to learn. If someone's humble, they don't have to take credit for everything. And so the example of level 5 leadership is someone that has supreme capabilities and is very competent, but it's balanced by a core human quality of humility. And by the way, I'm going to say when, not if, when you get to that level, literally the world's your oyster.
Right.
Because it's unlimited what you can achieve. And if we think about it in whether it be in business context, very few people ever reach that level 5 leadership. But it would be certainly worth aspiring to for any of your listeners. So maintain that humility, but you want to be highly accomplished with a counterbalanced personality trait of humility. So I would use those 2 books as sort of structural guidelines to structure your own development of your own leadership. And now I'd like to shift gears and add one more component, as if it needs to be any more complex, right, Richard?
No, I love it.
But can I add one more component?
Absolutely.
And that is the role of emotional intelligence.
Okay.
Emotional intelligence is defined, Daniel Goleman, I introduced you to emotional intelligence, although you probably learned it, probably heard of the topic before, but we took a bit of a deep dive into emotional intelligence while you were at Midwestern. And Daniel Goleman, Goleman, is considered the father of the science of emotional intelligence, a brilliant, brilliant author. I'd encourage any of your listeners to read any of the books written by Daniel Goleman. And emotional intelligence is defined as awareness of your own emotions, recognizing the emotions of others, and learning how to guide those emotions in a skilled way towards a desired result. And that's emotional intelligence. And I'm going to tell you that your success at developing your leadership is going to have a lot to do with your increase in your EQ, emotional intelligence. There's a very famous Time magazine article that was written a number of years ago where the cover of Time magazine said, "Is EQ more important than IQ?"
I think you just reposted that the other day, didn't you?
I reposted it the other day. I did. And the answer to that question is, in a scientific study of PhD engineers, so engineers that have achieved a PhD in engineering, and by the way, from Berkeley, so from a very prestigious graduate school, they were studied over a period of time. And the end result of the study is that the emotional intelligence of this PhD engineer was 4 times more important in their success than their IQ. And the interesting thing about it, the experts say IQ is what it is. It doesn't change. You come out of the womb with your IQ. I don't know that I fully believe that, by the way, but I'll just go with the experts because that's what they say. That IQ is just what it is. You don't change it. EQ, on the other hand, can absolutely be learned. You can come to the table with a average or low emotional intelligence, and you can develop it over time to be a very high level. And so I know we don't have time to do a deep dive into this in this interview, but I would encourage your listeners to take a study under the science, the social science of emotional intelligence, because if you develop your emotional intelligence, follow the model of Jim Collins, where you're highly accomplished but remain humble, and follow the 7 habits of highly effective people, you've got a recipe to develop your leadership skills. It's literally become step by step.
I love this. This is, if someone realizes, you know what, I need to be more effective on a personal level, then their go-to right away is going to be Stephen Covey's 7 Habits. And
sure,
anyone's going to benefit from brushing up on that. If someone says, you know what, I know I can be a better leader, but I just don't know where to go, then they can kind of use that level 1 to level 5 framework laid out in Good to Great.
And in his chapter, in that chapter, Jim he's a brilliant author, Jim Collins is. And in that chapter, he literally spells out and I didn't do a very good job of explaining it in the time that we had, but he literally spells out in a page or two what each one of those levels of leadership looks like. And you can take a self-test and be objective with yourself. Step back and look at yourself objectively and say, where am I? Am I level 1, 2, 3? Where am I? And what do I need to do to become 4 and 5? And it's all there. It's right there. It's not easy to make the transformation and do it, but you'll know. It's kind of like, working with a golf coach, where the golf coach says, Gary, at the top of your swing, I want you to pivot your hip about a quarter inch back. Well, it's easy to understand that, but not always easy to implement, right?
Right.
And that's kind of the same way here, but at least you'll know what you need to do. And that chapter becomes a blueprint for that.
Perfect. So then if someone realizes, you know what, okay, I see where I need to go leadership wise, but they realize the skill of being aware of their own emotions, because that's when stuff tends to hit the fan, is when emotions get out of hand, when people are upset, when they're exhausted, when they're frustrated. Being able to recognize and manage their own emotions, but then also recognizing and understanding and empathizing with the emotions of others. That skill set is the Daniel Goleman. Sorry, is it Dan Goleman?
Yeah, Daniel Goleman.
That's where they can go for that. So this is a great framework to work through for this season. And if someone just wants to self-diagnose and dive into these books, it's a great trio of 3 books to guide them on their journey. So that was perfect. Thank you.
Well, I'm so excited that you're devoting a season to this, because again, I made the statement earlier that I don't believe anything will direct the trajectory of a doctor's success more than developing their leadership. And sometimes leadership is vacuous. It's like we all think we know what it means, but do we really?
Right.
And I know this season is going to shed some very interesting light, and it's going to provide tremendous value to your listeners.
Well, and this has set us on the perfect foot of non-vacuousness and specifics that people can really dive into and really work on. Thank you. This has been a lot of fun.
Oh, my pleasure.
And I will be reaching out if I have questions kind of as this season goes on. I really appreciate the stories that you've shared, both in this episode, but then also throughout the years in your podcast.
Yeah.
And you're willing to be a leader in this podcasting space. I think we've all benefited tremendously. So thank you for being on the show.
Well, I want to recognize Paul and Tim in my own practice. I'm not there every day in the practice. They're there every day. And I'm very fortunate to have 2 amazingly talented clinical providers. They're very talented clinically, but they spend an equal amount of time, developing the soft sciences and developing their social skills and developing their leadership. And they are model leaders. They would never ask a team member to do something they wouldn't do themselves. There's I'll give your listeners maybe a quick takeaway that they can use. And, this is my 39th year in as a practice management advisor and as a coach. And in my 39 years, I have never, not once, has a team member come up to me, and I've been in over 2,200 practices. And Richard, never once has a team member come up to me, maybe after we develop some rapport and relationship, because I work very hard at developing rapport and relationship with the team members, so I can understand how to be more effective with a practice. But never once in 39 years, over 2,200 practices, has a team member come up to me and said something like this: Gary, you know what the problem is around here? I've been wanting to tell you, and I finally have the opportunity, and thanks for listening. But you know what the problem is around here? I'm so darn tired of hearing thank you that if I hear thank you one more time, I'm going to storm out of here. I'm sick and tired of it.
Right.
Okay. Are you surprised the fact that I've never heard that?
That blows me away. I would have expected that was everyday occurrence for you.
Now, do you know how many times I've heard the opposite of that?
Right.
And the opposite, it literally, if I had a $50 bill for every time I've heard the opposite of it, I would own the island next to Richard Branson's island in the Caribbean, but my island would be bigger.
Right.
And the opposite of that is, and honest to gosh, I've heard this quite literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times. And it's usually very soft and quiet and modest. It's not a chest thumping complaint by the team member, but he or she will come up to me and say, Gary, I know the influence that you want to have on the practice is to make this a better place. I get that. I understand you're hard around this. I get it. But man, it sure would help if doctor could somehow recognize what we're doing and say thank you more often. I would sure appreciate that.
So, and and let me jump in right here, because I want to say that maybe the dentist is afraid that first off, they probably just aren't thinking. And then the second thing is maybe they're thinking, oh, I don't want to praise people too much because then they're going to get lazy.
I actually think it's simpler. I get the analysis of what it could be. And the truth is it could be many, many, many things.
Sure.
But I actually think in most cases, the doctor has his or her head down and is so focused on their craft that they just miss the opportunity. I don't think it's conscious. I think it's subconscious of being so focused. And I'm not a dentist. I've never been a dentist. And I can imagine that your role as a dentist, it's very difficult to be focused on this micro field that we're focused on where, success or failure is measured in millimeters. That's got to be very difficult. And then to pull back and do a big picture analysis, right?
Right.
And so I think they just missed the opportunity. So all I'm asking for, doctors, is that you start to be aware of the opportunity and find genuine opportunities to complement your team members. And if you can be specific about it, you're going to be more successful. So, for example, it's one thing to say, hey, Carly, at the end of the day, hey, Carly, I just want to thank you for the great job you did today. Now, that feels warm and fuzzy, right?
Yeah.
And Carly walks away feeling good about that. But you want to turbocharge that? So it's, what if you could say, Carly, I happen to be walking by the front desk mid-afternoon about 2:00. And I heard you respond on the phone, and it must have been a question about insurance. And your response was so good that I just want to take a minute and say thank you. Thank you for embracing these communication skills, and thank you for representing me so well on the phone. That's a different level of appreciation. Carly, you did a good job is warm and fuzzy.
Yeah.
But if you can be specific about it, and just put it on your radar screen, doctors, and watch what happens. And I believe that it'll be sort of a catalyst for a lot of good things happening in the practice.
Well, and certainly costs a whole lot less than a bonus system.
And by the way, what does that cost?
Right. Nothing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, I ironically, I have a phone call I have to take to my business partner in Arkansas. This has been great. And I loved even that last little tidbit. I didn't want to cut this off because I felt like that is the kind of thing that a level 5 leader does that a level 4 leader doesn't do.
Exactly.
And those are the little habits of interpersonal connection and leadership that don't take a lot of time, but they do take a little bit of effort and a conscious thought, but the dividends are great. So thank you for sharing that. And thank you for being on the show. I really appreciate it, Gary.
Oh, Richard, my pleasure. And thanks for all the amazing things you're doing for our profession, and excited to see the success of your podcast. And it's just been an honor to be on here.
Well, cool. Well, we will have links to all of the amazing things that you've mentioned, including your shows, and people can reach out to you through that channel. And we appreciate you again. We'll talk to you later, Gary.
Thanks.
Okay, I really enjoyed interviewing Gary. He knows so much, and he's done this himself. He's got his own test kitchen, his own office, his own doctors that he's working with, where he gets to really see the best practices in action. If you want to listen to his show, he's doing a whole series on insurance dependency and breaking free of insurance. If you're into that, George is kind of on the opposite end of that spectrum. But check out his show, The Thriving Dentist Show with Gary Takacs. Thank you guys so much for listening, and we will talk with you next week on the Shared Practices podcast. I'm excited to announce a partnership with Sandy Pardue. We are rebooting the Dental Drill Bits podcast. Sandy and I sat down and said, what if we did a podcast together? What if we did a whole season of your show together? And it works out perfectly because I have a ton of questions and she has a ton of answers. So we combined my skill at asking questions but not necessarily knowing the answer, and her skill at answering every single question with a wealth of knowledge, specific examples, and experience. If you want to get your dental practice organized, if you have trouble with understanding the roles and the functions and the systems of your office, join us every Tuesday on the Dental Drill Bits podcast.